motherfucker. Say this shit, motherfucker. Fuck coochie. Let me tell you, you know why I lying. You know why I lying, motherfucker. I don't know if I should, I don't know. Like originally when I had that thought to open up this episode with a Bernie Mac impression, I thought it would be a lot more lively and good, but I kind of fucked that up.
You want to redo it?
No, I'm not going to redo it. I'll just go along with it. But, so humor has always been part of my life. Like, ever since I was a little kid, I remember sneaking VHS tapes of comedians that my family used to record off of HBO and watch them in my bedroom, unbeknownst to them. It's the thing that makes me connect with the people and the things that I love the most. So, one of two things happen when it comes to my humor. Either one, whatever I'm trying to perform works out and it's funny, or I would at least hope the awkwardness after is funny as opposed to what I said. So, at all points in time, I'm trying to get to a place where I can be more humorous, but most of the time, it just fails and I'm okay with that. This is Coffee and Catastrophe with Brent and Gabi.
Your Bernie Mac impersonation is pretty spot on, though. Although some people might, again, like in this world of like being really critical of others, some people might say it's racist, but that is how he talks. And you, like, again, for some reason, like you growing up really identified with like African American and Black culture, given all the Def Comedy Jams you watched and the fact that your parents spoke to you about the birds and the bees through a video that wasn't like the intended audience, like African American children.
Yes.
Yeah. So like that's part of your identity. Now you're not going to go as far as Rachel Dolezal or whatever and say that you are in fact an African American or Black or whatever. But that I know how much Bernie Mac means to you and how you think he's hysterical.
See, like the other day, I couldn't stop talking like Bernie Mac when we were just walking around the city, with my friend. I like even in the car. I just like commentate on shit as Bernie Mac, and I've been doing this for years.
It's also, I think it's really funny. You're really good at impressions. You're also like a naturally funny person. Like talking about humor, like you're really fucking funny. Like when did you know that you were funny? How did you cultivate your sense of humor?
It kind of just rubbed off on me because my family's really funny. My dad, he's like the patriarch of the family and the patriarch of the humor too, because he would always do all kinds of things when we were little, like when he would make like the home videos. Like it would start off cute, like whenever we would make Baboli pizzas. That was a thing when I was 3 years old. Like,
what are those?
Baboli, it's like a brand. So like a Baboli pizza crust. That's just the name.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Like the store-bought pizza crust.
Right. So we would make, so like on the weekends, he would make, pepperoni, sausage, and all that stuff. And I was like 3 years old. And he was like, oh, there's the flying pepperonis. And then he would like throw the pepperonis onto the pizza from across the room. And then afterwards, he would just let out like the absolute largest belches and farts. So... And then, on camera, we got my mom say, oh, look at the pig I married. And then he just, just completely opening, like, burping. And,
that's so funny.
My brother was a big fan of comedy, too. So he had a very similar upbringing to me in terms of discovering comedy. I think, maybe when he was very little, like, my parents had access to HBO. And the only way that you could really record anything back in the day was from a VHS tape. So what you had to do is you had to put the blank VHS tape in. You had to set up a recording, so your VCR had to be connected to the cable in the back, and you'd say, okay, from 6:58, you would actually do this all manually. From 6:58 to 9:05, you record whatever is on there, and you'd had to leave the channel on too.
Yep.
So during that time, if you let's just say we're watching recording a movie The Godfather. And you change to Weather Channel, you changing to the Weather Channel would actually carry over.
I love that we're having to explain this because there's potentially people listening in who are younger than you and I and don't understand this concept or never had to live through this.
No, dude, this was my obsession was recording, and not only that, but asking permission. Hey, mom and dad, this movie is on tonight. Can I record it? No, it's from 7 to 9, and then sometimes it was on at 1 or 2 in the morning. So we would do that overnight and then, just make sure it recorded. It was a huge thing. And my parents and my brother would record Eddie Murphy, George Carlin, all the Def Comedy Jam stuff. So it started when I was very little. It just really rubbed off on me. And I was just a goofy kid, but I was extremely happy and like always smiling and shit. So I don't know. I wish I could be my younger self when I grow up. Like I really want to. I was just such a happy kid, and I think it all started with me riding the small bus to school. I've talked about this on an episode, our youth episode. Like
literally. That is seriously like the funniest effing story of that boy shitting himself. It is the funniest fucking thing ever, and it probably shouldn't be, but it's so fucking funny to me, to the point that I like cry every time you tell this story.
Yeah, and like for those of you who have listened to all the episodes, or at least the youth part 1 and 2 episode, to remember Ben the bus hunter. Well, it turns out he grew up to rob a bank, and he's in jail. So
that's so fucking funny. Ben the bus hunter ended up robbing a fucking bank. So
just like when I was a little kid, I remember there was this one comedy special called Damon Wayans' Still Standing. I think this came out in 95, 96. He had a bit about what it was like being the black weatherman. Like no matter what no matter what the like story is, like no matter what the disaster is, like in the news or the weather, the brother gets that assignment. So he would be like, "This is Leon Jackson, they're just protesting. Oh, pew, pew, man, they shooting out here." And like it was like this whole bit, and then there was this one where like the white people are like sitting like safely in the studio, like, "Oh, this just in, tornadoes are sweeping the nation. Here with the exclusive story, Leon Jackson." And then like he had the chair, and then what Damon Wayans did is that he got prone on the chair, and his like arms and legs were out, and he was holding onto the microphone stand, so it looked like the wind was blowing him away, and he just whoosh. "There's a Leon Jackson! It's about 300 mile an hour wind out here. It's pretty bad." And I remember in 3rd grade, I did that. Except I didn't set up the bit. I didn't say, like, I wasn't a 9-year-old Brent or however old I was. I'm like, how does, like, the black guy, like, I didn't do that. I was just, there was, like, a storm we were having, and I said, "Oh, it's gonna be hit." So I actually, like, laid down, like, on the chair, like, prone, and I was holding onto the desk and table, and then I still went, "Whoosh, this is Leon Jackson! 300 mile an hour wind out there." And everyone was fucking dying laughing, and I got in trouble. Just because, like, I acted out and I incited laughter.
You incited joy and happiness.
Yeah.
I know many a classroom where that's not allowed.
Yeah, so I don't know. Humor's been a big part of my life, and still very much is to this day, and that's still how I connect with the things and the people that I do love. And that sounds a little too profound for the topic of this episode, but it's very much true. It's because how it's, how I make sense of things. But what does humor mean to you? Like, what's like your kind of journey? Like, how do you feel about it? Because I get your sense of humor.
Yeah.
But we've never had like a conversation like about this topic, like one-on-one.
No, definitely. So like my parents can be very funny. Like I wouldn't call them like, they're not like comedians, like they're not like super goofy. Like my mom's a little goofy, like in fun, exciting ways, but like my dad does have a knack for like doing like certain voices and stuff. And like definitely when we were little, he would do like, he can do a good Kermit the Frog voice, and he can do like, or he would like do a Grover. Like, did you ever have a copy of the book, The Monster at the End of the Book?
No.
Okay, so it's a Sesame Street book, and it's called The Monster at the End of the Book, and Grover, like, as this self-aware breaking the fourth wall, reads the title and is like, "Hey, there's a monster at the end of this book." And you flip and he's like, "Why did you turn the page? You want to see the monster?" And then he gets like angry, and my dad would like read it like as Grover. It was really, really funny. Or, I think that's like little like dads like joking around and stuff is probably like humor. And then as I grew up, like my dad can also be very sarcastic. And so like I that became internalized. I would say the first time I was really exposed to comedy though was actually my friend Olivia and I growing up would, this was at the beginning of like video on demand being big, and Comcast would have Comedy Central, those like 30-minute sets that like, I think it's called Comedy Central Presents. Mm-hmm. They would have them on demand, and we would just like pick some and like watch them, and just got really exposed to like many different types of like comedians and stuff. And then we would also watch, like, I wasn't really allowed to watch South Park, but sometimes we'd watch an episode of it, or we would watch Mind of Mencia when that was big. And Carlos Mencia was the big guy, big comedian. I remember watching a bit of Dane Cook and Dimitri Martin, and just like really getting exposed to like that type of comedy. And then of course, like my dad, my mom loved George Carlin. And so we would watch like funny movies sometimes. Like we would watch comedy movies. I remember it was like a big moment in my house when I was like old. My dad was like, "Oh, you're old enough to watch Kevin Smith movies." And we watched like Dogma and other stuff like that. And so I think it's been like a running thread. Obviously I've told you my dad has seen George Carlin. He saw Sam Kinison. He saw Richard Pryor. So that's always like been there. And while I probably spend more money attending concerts than I have comedians. The only 2 comedians I've seen that I've paid for were, oh my goodness. Who's the guy in Rush Hour that's not Jackie Chan?
Chris Tucker?
Chris Tucker. I saw Chris Tucker several years ago because Cody, my boyfriend at the time, loves Chris Tucker. Rush Hour 2 is his favorite movie ever. I'm not joking. I'm not being ironic. And so for his birthday one year, I got us tickets to go see him. And then the other person that I've seen and paid for was the guy that you and I saw, Jim Jeffries. I bought tickets for my brother, or I should say my brother and I's Christmas present to my dad was tickets to see Jim Jeffries. Other than that, I was lucky at Loyola. They have every March Colossus, which is like they have a band on Friday night and then a comedian they get to come and do a tour on Saturday night. And I saw Jim Gaffigan, Aziz Ansari, Mike Birbiglia, and I came back and saw the guy who plays Ron Swanson. Nick, I forget what his name is.
I know who you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. And I feel like a dick because he actually had a song in his set called I'm Not Ron Swanson. It was very funny. He's married to Megan Mullally. He is just hysterical. So I like comedy and I really enjoy it. It's, like one comedian that oh my gosh, I forgot she was at Loyola too, like for like freshman night or whatever. Eliza Schlesinger. She, I think, is hysterical. Some of her stuff gets like, I don't want to say overplayed. Like some of her stuff, like I haven't think was like as funny other than she had like this fucking bit. I will never forget it. She was like making me laugh so hard I cried. She had this bit about like girls going out and how we're like these like scared, like shivering deer, but that we like really like eat like nobody's business when it's girls' night out, and that like like how we'll chastise each other and just like table for 4, you, me, Vicky, Becky, you, me, Becky, and Becky's butt. Ha ha ha. And she's like doing this like demonic voice. She's so fucking funny. So yeah, I think humor has just like always been like there or a thread. It just hasn't been like as prominent in my life, like comedy, as it has been in yours. But it's still important. I still love it.
I've seen a lot of the first comedian I ever saw was George Carlin.
That's just so insane to me. That's so insane.
I'm so lucky. It was like on the tail end of his Life is Worth Losing tour. So I saw him in like September of 2005.
That was 13 years ago.
13 years ago. And then I saw, not in order, because it's hard to remember. I've seen so many. I've seen Andrew Dice Clay. I've seen Cheech and Chong. I've seen John Leguizamo. I've seen Joe Rogan a few times. Jim Jeffries, Dane Cook. I've seen Dave Chappelle. I've seen Chris Rock. I've seen, the list goes on and on. I've seen Tom Green, but I've seen Frank Caliendo. I mean, I only made the with Tom Green because
you met him afterwards. He was a dick, wasn't he?
Yeah, but I don't know. It was a weird show because it wasn't really I don't know. It was hard for me to rate, but I've seen a lot. I think everybody that is alive that I've always wanted to see, I have seen.
Yeah, I think the only person who I think I might want to see Chelsea Handler one day because I think she's pretty funny. Or who I really, really think is funny, who has 2 Netflix specials. Well, there's 3 people I've now thought of, but one is Ali Wong, who did Baby Cobra, and then she did it's so fucking funny that her Netflix specials, the first one she's pregnant, and the second one she's also pregnant, and it's just hysterical to me. Then there's the contributor from Daily Show, not Trevor Noah, the host, but the contributor who is Muslim and he's hysterical.
Trevor Noah?
Not Trevor Noah. It's a contributor. He's I think his special is called Homecoming King. It's so fucking funny. I can't remember his name. He is absolutely hysterical. You know what, though, is funny now that I'm thinking about this? The way that I prefer to get my news is through mediums like Daily Show and Last Week Tonight. Like, I don't like watching the news, but I fucking love Daily Show and I love Last Week Tonight because for some reason, like, politics is a circus and a joke anyway, so I might as well be getting it from like a funny ass person. Like, I seriously miss when Jon Stewart was on The Daily Show.
I gotta be honest, I think maybe I've only watched 1 or 2 episodes ever, and maybe when it was new. It's not that I dislike Jon Stewart, it's just I just never got into the late night talk show format.
Oh my god.
So I preferred like the traditional, like the way that I grew up and the way that I saw it is if you had an hour special on HBO, that was the absolute pinnacle of your career. I still believe that to this day, even though Netflix, though, they've taken over the stand-up comedy scene.
They really have.
They almost exclusively release content on there. And, you know, like Joe Rogan and Doug Stanhope. And I saw Doug Stanhope, too. Just forgot to mention it. But I forgot where I was going. But that's, like, kind of how I saw it. And, like, with the political comedy, I think where it comes from is the comedians are the ones that are able – what comedians do, like a great comedian, a lot of people check in with a comedian to see how maybe they should feel about a situation or like what's going on like in the news. A lot of people went to George Carlin just for that because we were just looking for the feelings. Like, how do we feel about this war? Yeah. And then he came in, he did Jammin' in New York, and like the first 15 minutes of that special, like he was just talking about the war. And, you know, one of the bits of that, one of the points of that bit was like the, you know, we're a warlike people, like war, like the Persian Gulf War is the first war we ever had on every channel plus cable. And he was the one that, you know, I can't, I'm not do it complete injustice. I'd say look it up on YouTube. George Carlin, Jammin' in New York, Persian Gulf War. But he's just saying like, you know, like how, you know, like men are like the cause of all wars. And like the bombs and the rockets and the bullets are all shaped like dicks. And like the leaders of that war were Dick Cheney and Colin Powell.
That's so funny. No, he's right.
All of those observations. And I grew up with a very rich upbringing of Richard Pryor as well. And he was a much different comedian. So like George Carlin, he was more like an anthropological comedian where he like dissected language and like euphemisms and terms. Richard Pryor, it was really hard to separate him as like a comedian from him as a person because everything that happened in his life, he brought on stage. Like he doused himself in alcohol and lit himself on fire. That was his closing bit of his Live at the Sunset Strip performance. And like he actually took out a match and like, oh, I saw your people were doing. And then like he like lit a match and he said, yeah, here's Richard Pryor running down the street.
I know. That is hysterical. That is absolutely hysterical. Was it they soaked? I thought he didn't soak himself in alcohol. I thought he caught on fire because he was smoking crack.
Well, there's a lot of different stories about how that went down. Well, the way that Richard Pryor said it, obviously, was a joke. He said that he loves milk and cookies.
Yes.
And then he mixed in like regular milk with pasteurized. And when he dipped the cookie in, everything blew up.
I think those were euphemisms for, I think he was using that analogous for crack.
No, well, like he said that, but later on he went to describe, like, you know, he didn't say, he was like, there was a video on TV that he was watching of the monk setting himself on fire.
Oh, no.
In protest. So what he did is he was like completely high out of his mind. So he just poured like alcohol on top of his head and sat down and then he lit himself on fire. And then he was running out of his house like while he was on fire.
Yeah, well, I knew that.
So if anybody's interested in any literature, I would read the book Becoming Richard Pryor by Scott Saul. S-A-U-L. And that really like documents his life from birth, before birth, until his very first comedy special. I also like had a very rich upbringing with black comedy. Like not like dark comedy, but like black people comedy, Def Comedy Jam.
Yeah, it's very, that's like how you related to the world in a lot of ways.
See, like I'm living a weird life. I'm a straight white dude who grew up with a rich black culture within the media and currently am living a gay lifestyle. It's weird. I don't know how the fuck this shit works out. So like some of the things that, like, for instance, I love Lady Gaga. I love Selena Gomez. I love Ariana Grande.
Love Florence and the Machine.
I love Florence and the Machine so much. So, but when I grew up with a black culture, like, you know, Kid and Play, Kenan and Kel, I don't know. I just can completely consume myself with it. So,
well, and that's like, again, that's like what still shapes like what you think is funny. And like, you love like Bernie Mac. Like when you mimic Bernie Mac, you're like, it's out of like appreciation and love. It's not out of a like mimicking how he talks. Like you're not, the content of what he's saying is funny. It's not how he's saying it necessarily. Like, I think is like how I can understand it. And that like you love this person and their humor. It's not meant to be a caricature and like a joke to like make fun of the individual. You're just like appreciating like their humor. Like, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people would have different opinions on that, but like that's how I interpret it.
I think if you were to interpret it under the like ideological lens of like, like racism and oppression and oppressor, it sounds like I am mimicking, like me, a straight white male is using my privilege and my like place in power to mimic and mock someone who is disenfranchised for my own well-being.
Totally.
However, that would be a lot more true if I did that voice, but as Barack Obama.
Like, oh yeah.
I tell you like it is, motherfucker. We gotta pass all these motherfucking bills, motherfucker.
Yeah, because then you're taking like the stereotype of you're taking the like stereotype associated with how African American men speak and applying it to a man who doesn't speak like that. So like just because he's black or half black. So like that would be totally like, but that's not what it's coming from for you. It's like, but I totally like, I think it's valid, like that, like criticism, like the way you like, like parsed it out. Like, I think that is a valid criticism and should be applied, but I just don't think it applies here. But maybe I'm biased because I know you and I love you. I don't know. Yeah.
When I think comedy is overanalyzed from an academic standpoint that has to fit a certain side of a political spectrum is when you kill comedy and you kill jokes. Because what's happening is that you're turning comedy into something where not a comedian like with George Carlin, he said a lot of things that were very controversial and not necessarily like hearkening to only one side of an issue. He was very unbiased to the point where, his daughter, Kelly Carlin, said that he was actually more for the disempowered, like as a man. And like he actually had a big problem with institutions. So in a way, George Carlin could technically have been a social justice warrior. However, when it came time for him to go on stage, he commented on everything.
Yeah. That's how I felt about Jon Stewart on Daily Show. Of course, the Daily Show has a left lean to it, but he was really willing to give it to everybody.
Yeah. I think right now, it's really hard to have the same humor as years ago, because even with a lot of new specials who are not out there to offend, they always have to preface the joke they're about to say. And I think that kind of hurts the joke a little bit.
Like you're seeing them kind of give like a trigger warning?
Trigger warning, not necessarily like, okay, I know this is about to sound fucked up, but here, I'm not trying to say this, but I'm going to say this. Here's the sentence. No, I don't mean that. I'm just saying. But it's not worked into the bit. So, like, going back to Louis C.K., he had a bit called Of Course, But Maybe. So there was a joke where he was just saying, like, of course, like, people who are allergic to peanuts, like, yeah, we should have peanut-free zones. Like, of course. But maybe if a peanut can kill you, you deserve to die.
Yeah, I remember that bit entirely. Yeah.
So,
like, that's funny. But what you're saying is, like, now it's just become I have to couch every joke I'm going to make so it doesn't, in the hopes I won't offend people because I've given them a warning, which frankly is bullshit. Because it's like, first off, if you really cared if what you're saying was going to be offensive, you probably wouldn't say it. So it's really like a fake thing. It's just like a safeguard of like, no, I don't really mean that. Or like if you honestly cared that much, you wouldn't be saying that. It's fucking bullshit to begin with. Like, I mean, like even like, I even think like maybe in some regard, like the trigger warning nonsense, like not nonsense, like triggering is an actual thing. But like even in some regard, like do those people actually care that they could harm somebody by saying these things? Because if they did, wouldn't they just not say them? But I mean, like that doesn't work for all kind of like content that needs a trigger warning or whatever. But it was just like, I think in that regard, the comedian actually doesn't care. They're basically like checking off the box of like, I said I didn't mean it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was okay, I think all of this started with the Don Imus controversy about 10 years ago. Do you remember what happened with Don Imus?
No.
Okay, so he was a shock jock, if you will. And he had his own radio show. This
kind of like
Howard Stern.
Howard Stern,
yeah, kind of like that. So there was like this, I think the Rutgers like women's basketball team at the time. Mm-hmm. He made a stray comment where he just said like, yeah, they look like a bunch of nappy headed hoes.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
So and then like he had to apologize, and I think he got fired.
That's where I actually had to have someone explain to me like what nappy meant.
Yeah. So I mean, he was referring to like, you know, the women's hair.
Yes.
You know, like nappy, but Patrice O'Neal, one of my favorite comedians ever, and not for this reason, but he went on TV shows to defend Don Imus, and one of the things that really hit home for me is when he was on these Fox News interviews, and he was even on a panel about like, you know, what it means to like offend and what comedy means. He said all jokes come from the same birth. You don't know if it's going to be funny or not until you say it. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to really like gauge, like if you're just like if you outrightly say something that is going to offend with no creativity behind it, yeah, I mean that'll probably risk more people being offended. Mm-hmm. But if you're trying to be like creative within a bit, you should still be able to say that.
Yeah.
But I feel bad for the comedians now because since Netflix took over,
yeah,
not only that, but within social media advertising like their gigs and like, you know, like their livelihoods, they kind of have to watch a lot of things what they say, unless they're seasoned vets. Like Dave Chappelle, he could say whatever he wants. But a new and up-and-coming comedian, like they almost have to say the right things.
No, I agree.
To really fit in now.
Well, and I think also like comedy in general is left-leaning. Like popular comedy is really left-leaning. I think like what is acceptable now always leans left. It never leans right in the political spectrum. So I feel like in order to be like a comedian, you kind of have to have like a liberal bent on things. You have to be left leaning. There's a reason that Jeff Foxworthy and like his tour of people and what they think is funny, there's a reason like they're kind of like on a fringe now, or the reason they're considered fringe, because like the dominant is like you are left leaning, you will make jokes about like that type of stuff, or like politics now or something like that. I just feel like that's always present. And like, again, like I'm a left leaning person, so I think they're funny, but you know, especially if comedy is supposed to be like inclusive, which I think it kind of is, like it's supposed to be, that then like they do kind of reject parts of their audience if the audience is like the listening public. I was actually just thinking about this. Are all of the comedians you look up to, save for like George Carlin, people of color?
Most of them, okay, like on my wall, I have pictures, like what I did was I like have this like mural of comedians on my wall. George Carlin and Doug Stanhope are the only two white people. I would say Louis C.K., but I mean, if you want to like do all the political discourse, he is technically half Mexican.
Yeah, which I knew.
So he's a person of color. Mm-hmm. So, but he doesn't look like it.
But he lives white privilege, probably.
Yeah, I mean, where do we draw the line? You know, in terms of like, you know, who, like what he, I don't know. I mean, I can go on and on, but Patrice O'Neal, Chris Rock, I have Richard Pryor on my wall, John Leguizamo. I want to put Cheech and Chong up there. I want to put up Joe Rogan. I want to put up, I would put up, I don't know. I'm trying to think like who else. Eddie Murphy. I have Eddie Murphy up there as well. So yeah.
Basically a lot of comedians who are people of color. You did have a few like white people in there as well, but I would say that's like from the people you just listed, like it's pretty balanced between like white people and people of color. Like, because I again was thinking about the fact that like Black comedy and African American comedy was so important to you and like part of your cultural upbringing, and in a lot of ways, and you have so much cultural capital in that realm, that I was kind of like, wait, like are all of your comedy heroes like also representative of the population that you like grew up on? And I think it's fairly balanced. It is. I don't think a lot of people probably have such a breadth in terms of like racial diversity in the comedians they like. I think also, although you disprove this completely, I think that people identify, like, they want to laugh at the person they identify with. So, like, for example, I love Eliza Schlesinger because, like, from her vantage point as, like, a white woman, and she and I are both millennials, like, we can relate on certain things and think certain things are funny. But at the same time, like, there's people who I don't relate to that I think are hysterical. Like the guy from The Daily Show whose name I still can't remember. I remember Jim Gaffigan being, like, one of my top comedians, like, thinking he was hysterical. Same with Mike Birbiglia. Mike Birbiglia is hysterical.
I am really trying. Here's the thing. I have never looked at I mean, maybe a few years ago when I was really, like, up on, like, living or like seeing things through, like, a lens of, like, you know, oppressor and race and all that stuff. I think when I started to do that, it really started to kill comedy for me.
Oh, for sure.
And I didn't, like, watch comedians as a kid, like, with, like, my parents didn't say, like, oh, yeah, you should have a diverse, you know.
No, of course.
So my thing is, I'm all for diversity if it means diversity is through Skittles and not through M&Ms.
And what you mean by that is that the Skittles are different flavors through and through, not the same on the inside, just a different color on the outside.
Yeah, because if you're a black comedian, a white comedian, a Mexican comedian, an Asian comedian, and all you're doing is talking about the exact same thing, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, because if you're all saying, like for right now, you have to be a comedian and say fuck Trump or say Trump is crazy.
Yep.
But to me, that's not real diversity. Just by being diverse on the outside. You know, I'm for different styles of comedians. And actually, looking back, Andrew Dice Clay and Sam Kinison had an extremely conservative point of view, if you really
they
broke
did.
it down.
They have a crazily conservative point of view. Sam Kinison's another one who like, I cringe at how horrible he is, but also some of the shit he says is so fucking funny. Like, his bit about, you know, he used to be like he was like an evangelical, like, preacher or pastor.
Yes.
And that was like part of his like history. But he had this like funny bit about like Jesus comes home after like on Easter morning, and then his wife's like, where the fuck have you been for 3 days? And he was like, I hear you're out with the boys, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, not that it matters to you, but I was dead. And like, so fucking funny. Although, yeah, no, Andrew Dice Clay, and he had this crazy small conservative worldview. And actually, talking about that reminds me of the History of Comedy miniseries that CNN put out, which is all about, like, again, the history of comedy. I went back all the way to, like, Lenny Bruce, who I never even heard of, and I find him just hysterical, although apparently he had some I think he had some, like, racist jokes, or he did some things that were, like, really bad or, like, whatever. But, like, most of his comedy, I just, like, the first time I heard him, I was like, he's hysterical.
He was one of the few comedians, I think he was the only one who was ever, like, arrested and convicted for speech.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But Carlin was, like, arrested too, but he never was, like, convicted.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think, am I remembering this correctly, that Lenny Bruce, like, committed suicide? He died really young, but I can't remember why.
It was kind of like more of like an overdose. Like, throughout his career, like, he was like the face of, like, a lot of, like, TV and shows.
Yes.
And then, like, he started, like, going darker. And then, like, towards the end of his career, he would just go out on stage and, like, he was strung out on, like, drugs and shit. And he would just read the book of law. And that wasn't even, like, a bit, like, he was just literally reading verbatim, like, what some of the laws are. And then he said a few things and he was arrested for it. And then he just kind of, you know, had a overdose, and then he died. So
so sad.
Without Lenny Bruce, there would be no Carlin or Pryor or anybody else that followed. So
yeah. Oh, actually, funny enough, someone just shared a bit from Whitest Kids You Know, which I never got into when they were like a thing. But there's this bit on TV that they did on their show where the guy is like, "Did you know that it's illegal to say I want to kill the president of the United States? Now, I just said it, and it's okay because it was an example, but it is very illegal to say," and he gets really serious, "I want to kill the president of the United States," and like keeps like finding ways to repeat it and like explain how he would want to kill the president and how to do it. But like all within the context of like, oh, I'm just using it as an example, ha ha ha. But like, it was so fucking funny. But like, that's another example of like illegal speech being used as like comedic relief.
Well, yeah, I mean, like that, like comedy like that is, you know, where it's at its best. And I think as of right now, I don't know, like I see like comedy is kind of like pop music in a sense where there's more often than not necessarily like the full art form of it, but just to kind of fit an image.
Yeah.
And like to sing a song that like fits the times very well.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, but you have a lot of comedians now coming out who are just commenting on the shit that's going on.
Yep.
But it's really hard to find originality anymore.
I think you're so right. Like, how many times do you see something that's just recycled through? Like, I think about that in music too. Like, I was telling you earlier, like, about this, like, sifting through soundscapes and trying to figure out things that I like and just being like, well, I don't like the way this sounds, or this is too repetitive, or I don't want to sound like that because blah, blah, blah.
So I think in order to really risk being truly funny, you have to risk being offensive, because at least comedy, in my sense, in its truest form, is to define what the line is. So it's to push the envelope. It's to like go up to that absolute edge, to not only where you're like having like profound like thoughts and experience it, but it's going against some. I found that like most comedy goes against some sort of social norm. Mm-hmm. So okay, like so for instance, like with Amy Schumer. I mean, I'm not shitting on Amy Schumer, but the fact that she is successful is because she speaks to an audience that almost defies traditional stereotypical female norms.
Yes, I agree. And I mean, she did get a lot of like flack in terms of like critics to be like, oh my God, she's disgusting. She's this, she's that. But I also know that, like, it's also now, like, a shtick to be, like, a foul-mouthed woman. And it's been, I mean, that's existed for a long time. I think it probably started maybe with Roseanne Barr, who was just, like, out there on the limb, like, talking about, like, the disgruntled housewife or whatever, and unafraid to be who she was. But at the same time, I think that even now that's, like, recycled or whatever. I will never forget, the woman who opened for Mike Birbiglia, she was from, I think, the south side of Chicago, and she made some joke at her own expense, and she was Black or African American. She made some joke about like, I know what it was. It was, she made a joke about being at Starbucks, and that like, being a Black person at a Starbucks, and like, she was making the joke about like when you go to the bathroom and you ask the person like next to you who you don't know to like watch your stuff. And she said that she like, was like so grateful for when a white woman next to her like asked if she would watch her stuff, and she was like unafraid of her as a Black woman. And then her punchline was, then I stole that bitch's laptop and like ran out of there or something like that. And I remember like no one in the audience laughed. Like, no one at Loyola laughed, because, like, that school is very social justice minded. Well, obviously it is, because, like, the Jesuits as a school of philosophy are. But, like, no one laughed.
See, that's fucking funny.
Like, but also think about, too, like, the audience is, like, and again, this was at the time, it was very much at the beginning of, this was a few years ago, but very much the beginning of that, or in the trenches of, we are so fearful of laughing at the edge, because oftentimes that edge is harmful for other people. And I think that's what it was in that moment. Like, and she was fine making the joke, but like everyone in the room was so uncomfortable. No one laughed. And like, I think that maybe like you're right that the comedian's job is to like find the edge. But I also know that like sometimes like the audience is not willing to go to that edge. So maybe their role is to find the edge and to get the audience to go with them to the edge. Because if they're just at the edge spouting off their jokes and everyone's just like staring at them, like it's not a good show. They have to like ease them into that, walking with them to the edge. And I also think that part of like comedy's duty is to find the truth and be truthful.
I definitely agree with you. It's really hard to find that nowadays, because even within finding the truth, it's very rare to just find something original within the truth. Oh
my gosh, yeah. I think the one comedian I can think of that's very original, and even then he probably has stolen a lot of his stuff, is Demetri Martin. And by stealing his stuff, I mean like maybe his act is like taken from other places, but he's like so unlike any other comedian. Like the drawings and the singing, like
he's I agree, but like, there's not too many people with that shtick now, but that type of comedy has always, like he's a prop comic.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. So that's repetitive. Prop comic.
Yeah, he's Gallagher and he's Carrot Top. Not comparing them, but in terms of like what you use to conduct your act, he is essentially a prop comic.
This is true. Oh God, I hate Gallagher. I hate Carrot Top. But at the same time, like they have their place, I suppose.
A lot of people don't give Gallagher credit. He actually had a lot of, if you really like just watch, because right now, if you think of Gallagher, he's the guy that just smashes the watermelon.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you really comb over and listen to his stuff, he had a lot of Carlin-esque bits. Mm-hmm. Like where he was like talking about like society and like, he talked about like the way language is dissected. So like that got, I think how smart he was got lost in the fact he was the guy that just smashed a watermelon with a hammer.
No, I agree. And actually, funny enough, my my aunts and uncles, apparently my grandmother would just like put them in front of the TV and they'd watch Gallagher. And when he came to like Zanies and like Hawthorne, like near Hawthorne Mall or whatever, like my uncle was like, "You were my first babysitter." And it was like really funny because like my uncle Nicky was like a flippin' wild child. He was like the first string of kids who like got diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. Like when they actually acknowledged it, like he was the first to be fucking diagnosed. And Gallagher was his favorite thing.
See, here's what's sad about that. Gallagher's brother went on the road and stole his act. So I don't know. I don't know if your uncle actually saw the original Gallagher that went out there. Maybe he saw his twin brother who was stealing his act.
Wait, are you telling me a joke or is that real?
No, that's real.
Did Gallagher know?
Yeah, but like there was like a point in time where he just like
he's like, "I'm done. You go do it for me."
Yeah, but then like he kind of came back for a little bit, but then he went back into obscurity again. But no, his brother went out on the road as him and stole his act. So there's probably a possibility.
But with his permission?
No.
What the fuck?
Yeah, dude, look it up, dude. It's fascinating.
Dude, yeah, no, that's what I'm going to like research after I leave. You know, new things I search on Wikipedia. Not just man-eating animals. Gallagher and his twin brother.
Right.
Who's the real... Yeah, didn't I tell you? I think I talked about that a couple weeks ago, how like when I'm bored and on Wikipedia, I just like to read stories about man-eating animals, like the Tsavo lions that, you know, killed all those railroad workers in the Congo. I fucking love that shit.
I did not know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah. There's also this tiger in Russia that, like, killed a bunch of people, supposedly because somebody shot her cub. There was a bear in Japan that, like, killed a whole family. And then, okay, so it was like a long time ago, and this like Japanese family lived in like the woods in like a cabin. And the dad and the son, or the oldest son, was like gone, but everyone else was in the house, like two young siblings, baby and mom. And this bear straight up comes in, kills everybody, and oldest son comes back, I think with dad too, and they realize everyone had been slaughtered, and the bear came back to kill them. And, like, they thought it was, like, an evil forest spirit, basically. But it was just a bear. Well, we don't know, actually, because who knows? Could be an evil forest spirit bear thing. But yeah. And now there's, like, a monument, like, a scary statue of, like, a man-eating bear. And there was a movie about it, too. But yeah. And there's a book called Tiger, which is, I think it's called, like, Tiger, an Untold Story, which is about that tiger in Russia that, like, went and hunted people down. And there was also, yeah. But the Tsavo lions is, like, for me, is, like... an obsession, because it's this idea that like nature was literally battling the work of man. They were killing railroad workers so the railroad could not continue. And it's totally like nature like fighting back against man. And I fucking love it.
So,
and that's a real story. It's not even made up. Oh, well, you know, it was that, you know, nature was fighting back until they hired like a world famous hunter to kill them. And they're stuffed now and at the Field Museum.
Did they hire Chuck Norris?
No, this was before his time. Okay. They actually hired this famous guy who literally his job was to go and hunt down specific animals. He had a novel about these two lions that he killed, and because he had been used before to kill a tiger in India that was doing like the same to a village. It'd been like ravaging a village. But I just find it absolutely fascinating. There's, of course, the film adaptation of this story called The Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer. but they don't have the Savo lions. They use just like a regular African lion, which they don't look like Savo lions. Savo lions have no manes. And of course, it was weird because it's two male lions literally teaming up to kill humans. And some people thought that there was like tooth damage to like one of the lions, and they think that that's why they thought they were killing people. But then I think I saw something recently that like actually that's wrong. Although they had the tooth damage, it wouldn't have been bothering him. So they just had a taste for human flesh.
That is very much what is exactly happening on social media to comedians.
Tell me about it.
Well, right now, see, I've heard of the quote made by Joe Rogan called that we are in a culture that likes to partake in recreational outrage. Mm-hmm. So, like how people take marijuana for recreation, but we're like so likely to jump on somebody for like doing something wrong. Typically within the guise of comedy. I don't know if recreational outrage is like the right term for it. Perhaps maybe it's I think we hold celebrities to such a high standard, and I think as people, once we sniff weakness, we pounce on it no matter what. So I think this feeling comes from, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if you've worked at a shitty job long enough to have seen this or worked with like a lot of coworkers, but have you ever been working hard at something on the job, or maybe witnessed somebody else working hard, and then there was just somebody not doing their job or standing around, and then you felt this like tinge of injustice against them?
Oh, totally. Like working retail as like a manager, like when I would see like sales staff, like one person is doing everything that I've asked them to do and is doing really good and like pulling their weight, and then there's another person just like in the corner. Or like there would be one person at my main job at Rock America who was like, we were supposedly like the same level, although I took on a little more responsibilities than her. And she would always take the easier job of like folding t-shirts in like when, instead of like being a salesperson, or helping out the owner, like fill like the merchandise bag up and like running the register with him rather than dealing with all the people on the sales floor. And yes, totally have felt that injustice before.
I think we all have that within us, and whenever we see a celebrity fuck up, I think we all have this thing where perhaps a lot of the celebrities out there, we maybe have this deep-seated envy that their fame and fortune has not been earned. I think a lot of people have this hatred for Kim Kardashian.
Oh, yeah. I actually, I don't want to say a hatred, but I do have this element of disgust towards people who didn't, quote unquote, work for what they have. I mean, like, for example, like Kim Kardashian was born to very wealthy parents. And then, she really got famous through the sex tape she made with Ray J. And then, then of course they got their own TV show or whatever. And they're kind of like, I'm sure they have lots of money and they do lots of philanthropy. But like, other than that, like, what do they contribute to the world other than entertainment, quote unquote? But yeah, no, I totally hear what you're saying.
Yeah. So I believe that to be true with comedians, because unless you study comedy, you don't see all of the hard work and late nights that these people have had. You don't see the craft of them trying out new material, preparing it, like risking just fucking up and failing, like within like a crowd of an audience, and I've seen that with Chris Rock. Like his Bring the Pain episode was arguably like his best hour of stand-up he's ever produced. However, I saw the exact same stand-up bit when he was a guest host on Def Comedy Jam, and he absolutely bombed.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just don't, they see that like, okay, you're funny. Like they just went up on stage and then they just didn't put in the work that, it takes the craft. So I think a lot of people who just don't understand the work ethic involved with comedy see a lot of comedians having this sort of unearned celebrity.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people who are fans of comedians. I think Kevin Hart, he's the biggest comedian right now because that guy, I mean, a lot of people don't know where he came from and how he started out, but like he's in every movie now. He's a millionaire. He could sell out any gigantic stadium like with ease.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people like his character right now. I think a guy like that is in a lot of danger because as soon as he fucks up even a little bit or goes against his persona, he's in trouble. So another thing that I think of our obsession with celebrity is a lot of people, like we like people based on their predictability. So, for instance, I may have made this point personally or on I can't even remember anymore. But so if a celebrity has this sort of element of predictability and then they go against it, that's when people jump on them. So, for instance, Michael Richards, remember when he went on that racist rant in the comedy club years ago?
Michael Richards is the guy who played Kramer in Seinfeld, right?
Correct.
Yes.
He portrayed himself as a person who would never say or do anything like that. That's why his career was ruined as soon as he did that. Mm-hmm. However, there are certain guys who you wouldn't expect them to do, like you just expect them to like say that or do that stuff. So,
well, and maybe that's why it was such a shock when the Louis C.K. stuff came out. Was like, this is a guy who has like feminist bits or like bits about women's rights that are like really funny and apropos, yet he was whipping his dick out as a quote unquote joke in front of people and beating off. So
yeah, I think a lot of the feminists latched onto him and they had to reject him immediately to save face, because had they done any research on this guy, they would have not have loved him like they loved him only hearing his bits.
Yeah, so you're saying that like they chose like feminist sound bites or bits that he'd done in the past to like him. And
Yeah.
then, but that being said, like I'm a feminist, but like I've listened and like seen his stuff before. I didn't just know his feminist bits, but I totally, as soon as I heard that, I'm like, no, I can't support that person. But, and that's, I mean, that goes the same for like the Brand New. I don't listen to Brand New anymore because of Jesse Lacey, the lead singer, and what he did with his manipulation of like 14-year-olds to get for like sexual benefit and gain. So like, I get what you're saying though. I totally understand what you're saying, because I do think that comedians, I think a lot, like comedians especially, are now subject to this like public outrage type thing. I also think that just people in general who have some like spotlight on them, like everyone has to tiptoe around everything to make sure. Well, I don't want to say tiptoe. I think rightfully so. Now people have to be really conscious of their language and like who they're going to offend or what they're saying. I think that that's right. But obviously, anytime a pendulum swings to one extreme or one specific direction, there's going to be backlash and there's going to be things that are there's going to be consequences or negative stuff as a result.
Yeah. The way I see it, I have the right to offend. You have the right to criticize, but you don't have the right to not be offended.
Well, I think that you don't have the right to not be offended. So basically, I have the right to be offended. Because if we take away the double negatives.
Right. So the thing is, it's not my job to make sure that you are not offended.
Yes. Like a comedian reserves the right to offend people.
Yes.
And then the audience then reserves the right to be offended.
Yeah. Not only that, but there is no universal offensive thing. It's all within context. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, let's try this out.
Oh, no.
Gay people should not get married because it's fucking gross.
I'm offended.
Okay. So, I don't understand how you could look at another man's hairy ass and say, oh, I gotta have that.
I'm offended.
Okay. So, I'm against gay marriage. Because why would you ever ruin the sanctity of love with marriage?
I'm very against. I am very against.
No, like, why would you ever love someone so much and say, like, oh my God, we need to get the government involved in our love?
Is that a George Carlin bit?
No.
Oh, okay.
More Doug Stanhope.
Oh, it's Doug Stanhope?
But, so, like, my best friends are gay. I love them so much. My parents have been married for 40 years. All they do is fight every single day about DVR space and, like, who took the last bit of Ben Gay.
And you don't want your gay friends to experience that.
No! The last thing I want for them to... I love them so much. The last thing I want them to do is to get married.
That's... Okay, so that last bit's really funny. But again, like, you're not actually against gay marriage. So that's what allows it to be funny.
But... you agree, like, you're not as offended of me saying I'm against gay marriage.
Yeah, because it was couched, because again, if we like analyze the rhetoric of it, it's because you are saying that it's not, the reasons you're giving are not the norm of like why people are against gay marriage. They're usually against gay marriage because quote unquote sanctity of marriage and, you know, Christian beliefs or whatever, blah, 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 or the government doesn't need to be involved, blah, blah, blah. But you're using like the experience of watching your parents that like married life equals pain and fighting and suffering and stuff like that, instead of the quote unquote normal reasons people hate on gay marriage, which is like something about God.
Now, like, I mean, it's bad. It's already hard enough to find someone that you're compatible with, but imagine being gay. Your pool is a lot smaller, so finding a soulmate is extremely rare, especially if you're searching only within your zip code. To risk having that ruined by marriage?
The way you said that, by marriage?
You want to fucking get married? I don't care how great the reception's gonna be, but like 30 years down the line?
A gay wedding reception. Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's a party.
So, like, when I go to the pride parades, I fucking push the religious people out of the way, and I'm like, don't get married! I don't want you to get married! This is the last thing I want you to do! No!
Don't do it, it's a trap straight people set up for you!
But they're picketing right next to me, so they think I'm the asshole.
See, but that's funny, because again, it's like, you're not hating on gay marriage because it's a guy and a guy or a girl and a girl. It's because you're saying that marriage is just a horrible thing for everybody.
But I still said I'm against gay marriage.
Truth.
And you agreed. And like,
well, no, I didn't say I'm against gay marriage.
And you were not offended.
I was not offended because again, you couched it in something that's like not offensive.
See, it's because it's within the context of the joke and not just the words. Because I started off by saying I am against gay marriage. Mm-hmm. So I think when you look at anything through a lens, you have to look at certain words, mm-hmm. and you don't look at context. You just look at the words that are there. So
you think that instead people would be looking at that context.
A lot of people look at the words. They don't look at the context of a joke. So a lot of comedians who are getting in trouble for the things they say, like Tracy Morgan got in trouble for that too. Joe Rogan recited this on one of his stand-up specials. Tracy Morgan said if he ever had a gay son, he would punch his gay son. However, in the exact same night, he said that he would eat a mile long of shit just to get to Beyonce's ass.
Ew.
You can literally take the most progressive and like most likable comedian and take one of their jokes completely out of context and only highlight a few select words.
Yeah.
And you can make them seem like the biggest piece of shit in the world.
No, I think that's totally true. I think that's totally true. And like, I think soundbite culture is a very big, because then things are like manipulated and used against the person. Like, so for example, Brett Kavanaugh, who I do not support whatsoever, there was an article going around that he called contraceptives abortion-inducing medicine or abortion-inducing pills or something like that. But when you looked at the case itself, he was quoting the group he was defending in court, which was it was like a religious organization, like a group of priests, and this woman was denied coverage of her contraceptive because they said, of course, we don't like believe in this stuff. We think that they said we as a group think that contraceptives are abortion inducing medicine. And I believe he was quoting them when he said that, but then it all came out, oh my God, he believes it's, and I quote, abortion, blah, 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 which I suppose maybe he does because he was willing to use that language. But I also was like, well, what if he was just quoting them? And again, I don't support Brett Kavanaugh. I don't like the fucking asshole, but, for that, like, I was literally like, okay, but what if he's literally just quoting them? Like, what if he's literally not? And again, I mean, that's not to say I should quote, the KKK, because otherwise people will think that I support them. But I don't know. I just saw, like, to make this point of like, well, what if he was actually just quoting them? Sure, it makes the soundbite that he called them abortion-inducing pills, but what if he was literally just quoting the case and the group? Again, don't support this guy, but like that's what I'm, thinking. See,
you bring up a very interesting point. Not only that, but you had to.
Oh yeah,
you had to like
say
preface.
Because again, I don't think in this context, maybe there is some recreational outrage about politics and stuff in addition to comedy and like in culture period. I think there is recreational outrage. Like it's like to be offended by something is somehow like all I have to do is be offended and then all of a sudden I'm in the right. I don't necessarily think that that's correct. I think it's valid to say like, I'm like, if you're offended, I'm sorry. I think that it's valid to recognize feelings. That's totally fine. But I also feel like, yeah, there's this weird play at hand where I have to couch, like I have to preface everything I said with, I don't support Brett Kavanaugh as I say this, because again, I don't want the recreational outrage of people saying like, oh my God, she supports Brett Kavanaugh. And because of that one thing, like, I don't like this person. I'm not going to support them. Even like your Bernie Mac impersonation, that could definitely be subject to recreational outrage because people are like, again, you're using your position of power to commandeer and manipulate and use this black comedian's bit and how he speaks and how he talks. And you're using that for your purposes, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, no, it's an interesting time where humor has become such a divisive thing because we live in the culture of outrage and how like comedians, I think, are now fearful more than ever of what they say because of social media. And because now the right thing to do is if someone offends a whole group, you have to back off of them. And I think in many situations, rightfully so. Like, you know, people not supporting Louis C.K. anymore, I think rightfully so, because we should support people who do stuff like that. You know, Brett Kavanaugh, even though he got flippin' voted in, many people backed off of his nomination in terms of like support once it came out about these allegations against him. Like rightfully so, because we don't want those people in power. But at the same time, like sometimes this outrage, I don't know. I think it's just something we need to question sometimes, the outrage culture. Are you being offended because it's trendy? Are you being offended because I don't think that's true for a lot of people, but also I think some people have been teaching or preaching this idea that the right response is to be offended. And when you're offended, you do X, Y, Z. And I think while you're correct in saying I have the right to be offended, but like kind of the role of the comedian is to find the edge and to offend, because then we know like what our standards are. We know where the line is from that exploration.
Definitely 100%. Yeah. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
So so my way around this is, I think it's really important to use humor to explore feelings. I do that with my everyday life. You know, some of the most profound conversations I've ever had with people are ones where I was able to explore some of the deepest, darkest, most profound feelings through the guise of sense, like through humor.
Yeah.
Because that makes it palatable. So there's nothing wrong with, you know, putting peanut butter on a pill to swallow it. That's what people give dogs.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
Every morning I slather my birth control pill in peanut butter and then I swallow it.
Yeah. And that's,
I don't actually.
Well,
I just dry swallow it.
Oh, damn, dude. No water?
Yeah. Well, it's tiny. Have you ever seen a birth control pill? It's tiny. Yeah, it's like, I'm not too good at math, but it's like maybe a millimeter big.
So it's the size of a fetus, you would say?
I'm so triggered right now.
See? There you go.
I shouldn't say I'm so triggered because, again, I don't want to make light of triggering because it is a real thing. And again, I'm like couching what I'm saying because I don't want people to be offended by what I just said.
Right.
But yeah.
So
the size of a fetus, fuck you.
One of the things about comedy, or at least stand-up comedy, that is lost is that there is no dialogue with the audience. There is, so like right now, me and you are having a dialogue, so I could offend you, and then I could actually ask why you're offended and gain a better understanding. But with a comedian, they go out there and it's, you know, every last one of them is taking a shot in the dark.
Well, it's a monologue. It's a monologue with a microphone, and they only know how well they're doing based off the audience's reactions. What was that?
The fuck was that?
Was that from behind you?
I don't know. I think maybe somebody was offended and they started howling. specifically at me.
The only thing I'm thinking is that maybe the tenant on the other side, it has like a drill or something.
It could
and we
be.
heard it.
It could.
Otherwise, a ghost was just going.
Yeah. That was the ghost of all the comedians' careers who had to be, so.
They're actually, it's kind of like the ghost of like offensive comics past coming to tell you, Brent, don't do it. Don't be offensive. The role is not to find the line. The role is to make money. Ooh.
No. The real purpose of comedy is to heal. That's what it really is.
And I know you're a firm believer that laughter and comedy are great medicines.
Oh God, like every little part of it. I just don't like the fact that if I have genuinely offended people, I want to know why and like have that dialogue, and I understand, but I'm getting the sense that there's a lot of offense taken that feigns moral superiority.
I agree.
When they say like, oh, I would never laugh at that type of joke, only because they heard buzzwords.
Well, yeah, because again, it's that moral high ground. It's that moral stance to say, I'm a better person. I would never laugh at that type of stuff. It's, and like, again, I think rightfully so, like we shouldn't laugh at like certain things. Like I can't just say like, well, that's bullshit. We should never be offended. Like being offended is valid, but I also know it's kind of trendy to be offended because you take that moral high ground. When you say, I'm not going to laugh at a racist joke, you're taking a moral stance, which rightfully so. We shouldn't laugh at racist jokes.
I will never laugh at a racist joke that's not funny.
Oh God. I know what you mean when you say that. Like, I know what you mean. Like, if something is just intended to harm, you're not going to laugh. But if it's like said, I think what you're saying, like what you're thinking is, because I'm understanding and how I would understand that is that like Cat Williams, for example, or like another black comedian, like black comedians make racist jokes. That woman at Loyola made a racist joke at her own expense. And maybe if it was a predominantly black audience, they would have laughed because while it's racist, to them it would be funny. Because this woman is using the stereotype and kind of like, she uses it to her advantage in the sense of like, oh, I was so happy when this white woman did not think that I was going to steal her laptop. And then I fucking did. Like, doing that is like funny. It's ironic. And like, but again, in that room of predominantly white people, which, there's students of color, obviously at Loyola, but in a predominantly white space, didn't fly. Because everyone knew if we laugh, then we're like really offensive. Like that's not okay. We can't do that. So yeah, I totally understand what you mean. What
really kills me is that I hate as part of a white identity now, that means I have to be the one who knows better with everything. And I have to...
I totally agree. I totally agree.
And being white, I have to know better than you.
Well, ideally, the people of color have, like, in that instance of, like, the white audience not laughing at this woman's joke. Ideally, that is because white people have listened to people of color when they say, that's actually not funny, you can't laugh at that, or like, that's actually not like a joke. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying, which is that like, there are, how many like times is it like, that these like liberals, especially like white liberals, take on this role of like, I know what's right and I know what's wrong, and I take the moral high ground whenever, something's brought up because I know it's right.
I hate that so much.
I know what you're talking about.
I see it.
It's like liberal superiorism or like moral superior. Yeah, I totally get it.
No, I mean, I just hate it. And like a lot of the things that that is sparking offense is white people's offense. Not even like black people's offense or Mexicans people. Like it's all white people being offended at shit.
Well, I think that I don't know how much of that I agree with, because I do know that there are, like, people of color who will get offended, like, rightfully so, at, like, offensive jokes, like, geared towards, like, their group's expense. But at the same time, I do know what you're saying. It is trendy for, like, and this is the thing, too. It's not coming from a place of genuine love and care or respect for this person or this group. It's coming from this is what is morally superior. you know what I mean? It's not from I genuinely don't want to hurt people's feelings. I think maybe there's part of that. Oh man, I feel like I'm getting really cynical now. I would hope for the majority of people, it is, I genuinely love and care and appreciate my fellow man, and I never want to offend them, and I want them to feel welcome and accepted and tear down these systems of oppression. And I want to be part of that. But I also think that there's like almost like that sociopathic, there's people who have that like sociopathic tendency who are like, this is how to get ahead. This is how I can feel powerful and feel like morally superior and like ethically superior, is to like take this stance. But deep down inside, they actually don't give a fuck. They just really like, they want to feel superior. They don't actually care.
No, and they're not doing anything to make the world a better place. Like, that is how you change the world, is True. By like sparking outrage, but that's not how you make it a better place.
Yeah, it's like, and if we're going to talk about recreational outrage, okay, let's say you're really offended by, you know, language or like example, well, I don't want to say offended is the right word when like there's like a black teenager shot who's unarmed. Like, that's not a good example of outrage culture, because I think that's that's like an injustice and like people are rightfully outraged by it. But like an example of like outrage culture with like, let's take a comedian who said something offensive. Like, okay, so this person said something offensive and you're offended by it. What are we doing to work beyond the offense? Like, I know like some of these people we just need to like cross out, or the tendency is to just cross them out, X them out, blacklist their name so you cannot, so they don't perform again. But like, sometimes that's the right decision, but is it always the right decision? Should instead be a dialogue. Why not create a dialogue with the person rather than blacklist them entirely? Like, why aren't we trying to, and again, like, it's really not anyone's space to like try to quote unquote rehabilitate this person or start the dialogue. I don't know. This is so tricky because like, I think that people being offended, again, that's their right. But I think if it stops at being like, I'm offended, I'm blacklisting you, if that's the only course of action, I don't think that's right. I think at some point there needs to be a dialogue for like things to happen and to be going in the right direction.
I get what you're saying. Kind of going back to your earlier point about how there was no like love or care or compassion. It's just like feigning moral superiority. I have used my humor in the most brutal ways, the most brutal ways possible in the absolute most wrong times of other people's lives to bring out that laughter at both of our expenses. Like, whether it's like at a funeral or a hospital, I do it in such a way to where they're laughing. And to me, I have to risk being offensive and then being offended just so I could use laughter to heal. It doesn't work every time, but I know where I usually get a sense of where the line is drawn. And usually like when I'm with people, I'm just able to really like pick out those little things. And especially nowadays, it's really just become, we're supposed to take our cues from what other companies are doing in terms of comedy. Yeah. And I have to find certain things funny, like, because they are provided by somebody like a person of color. Not everything. Okay, like, I really don't like using these words, but not everything that an oppressed person says that's funny, supposed to be funny, is funny. Mm-hmm. And it's just like a non-oppressed person, like, just because what they like, not everything a non-oppressed person who's a comedian says is funny. Yeah, it goes both ways. Like, if anybody, I would hope that everybody has the right to go out there and say the most offensive and fucked up shit, and I don't care. I mean, who or what they are. Like, I completely support Dave Chappelle on everything that he has said and done in terms of comedy, and he even had his own kind of spiritual awakening where he realized when he was on the set of Dave Chappelle, he walked away from like millions of dollars, but he did the racist pixie skit, and he saw a guy that was like laughing at him and not with him. Yeah. And, you know, he had that, but, you know, there's like this business sense like behind it too. So, well, and I think what I loved I think it was his last Netflix special, the second one where he was at that really intimate comedy club, where he talked about the story about like what happened to him was like what Iceberg Slim
talked about, where like, you know, every pimp has their knows how many miles he can get out of his best girl, and then the way he extended the mileage of his best girl was he completely manipulated her into thinking that, you know, her John was dead and that all these bad things were going to happen, and he was able to bring her back into his business and get more miles out of her through that pure manipulation. And he felt that he was the best girl and the industry was manipulating him. And so like, I think that in that same vein, I think that sometimes these movements like outrage culture also utilize people and objectify their story for their own manipulation and purposes. Like, and again, a lot of times this is out of moral, well, I don't think a lot of times, I think sometimes it's out of moral superiority. It's not out of genuine care for the person. It's just to feel like I'm right and you're wrong, which is just, it's so hard because it's like, it's, I guess comedy has always been political, but like now more than ever, it is a political game practically.
Yeah, it's more advertised as political, and a lot of comedians are, you know, talking about politics because it's sort of the thing that's part of the zeitgeist of American culture right now. But at least with me, I just don't. I think what'll happen, and I don't think it's going to happen after Trump leaves in 6 more years. I think what's going to happen is people will just latch on to another new thing. And I think it's because what we're really doing is like within social media, we're not really using that as a tool to learn or to be better people, but to like consume ourselves with a lot of other like people's like negative emotions on things. And I just really hope we could all come to this consensus, you know, of understanding, you know, and yeah, there are certain jokes maybe that should be off limits, but that's not to say that you should only say the right things and only say the things that you genuinely don't believe. Because, you know, the line is, you know, different every single year.
Yeah. And I think, again, I think this really does come down to the roles that you illuminated in the rights. The audience has a right to be offended, but the comedian has the right to try to find that edge and to try to push that boundary, because sometimes that's where the truth is. But it's also kind of like their job as like cultural commentators, like to find the edge. And I think that when we can always come back to a dialogue rather than competing monologues is when we will make progress in depth and growth, even in comedy.
Humor has really changed my life. And I think without my sense of humor, I wouldn't be the person who I am today.
I agree. I think you and I have both experienced things in life. You especially have experienced things in life that without comedy, maybe you wouldn't have survived.
Oh, God. So many. Like so many, so much tragedy. Yeah. And a lot of comedy had to come from it.
Well, it is two sides of the coin. Comedy and tragedy. And sometimes you use, you know, sometimes the most horrible things are the funniest. Like you know, after you've healed from it. Like, to bring it back to you being on the short bus with Ben the bus hunter and the kid who would shit himself every day.
Yeah, it's the story of my life.
Being on the bus with a kid who won't stop shitting himself every day.
Yeah, he took off his overalls and just scooped it out, and I had to crawl over the deer pellets.
the deer pellets.
Deer
pellets. Ugh. Well, my friend, is there anything more we can say about humor, or that you want to leave us with?
How much time we got, or what are we at?
The time is 2:15, and we've been talking for an hour and 20. And I'm worried.
No shit?
Yeah.
All right, I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, you gotta get the fuck out of here.
All right.
That's why I'm saying that.
Well, this has been an episode of Coffee and Catastrophe with Brent and Gabi. Feel free to follow us on Facebook and, you know, Twitter, Coffee and Catastrophe, Twitter at CCWBG. We are on Stitcher, Castbox, and we have our own website, coffeeandcatastrophe.com. So I have a feeling that we will revisit this topic again somewhere down the line. But in the meantime, thank you guys very much for listening. Take care of yourselves and be good to each other.
Bye, guys.